Welcome everyone, it's Ken Bergen here from Silver Chef. A great topic today, buying or selling a cafe or a restaurant. We're here to help simplify the process for you. There are legal issues involved, there's negotiation, there's emotions as well. And we want to talk about all those things with you today. We've got a great panel of experts to look at this question from a variety of different angles. And what's absolutely part of this is ask lots of questions. You know, we live off the questions, and your question is probably one that someone else is wondering about as well. So there's no question too trivial. We'll do our best to answer them all as we go along. If need be, we'll follow up with answers afterwards. But I just want to go through a few little technicalities about the webinar today. Fortunately, most people are used to Zoom after the torrid year we had in 2020, but just a few technicalities. So the questions and the chat all go into the chat box. Okay, so we'll just drop. I wouldn't mind if a few people just would put in the chat and tell me how's my sound? Am I loud enough? Is it clear enough for you? If you wouldn't mind just dropping that into the chat, and so I know. Good, thank you, Danielle. Thanks, Kaylee. Terrific. All right. Okay, so that's one place on the chat. You forget about the Q&A box, it's all going into the chat, okay? So an important thing with your chat also, see down the bottom of your chat box, there's a little blue strip. Set that to all panelists and attendees. So the question you put in or any comments, everyone can see it. It's great to kind of share your thoughts and questions in there as well. Okay, we don't have a poll today, but yeah, share away, and we'll also be dropping links in there. Sven Wick, who works with me, is going to be keeping an eye on that. And so there's going to be links to our experts and also some Silver Chef resources. And most of all, take notes. You know, ideas go in one ear and out the other, and there's a lot happening. Just scribble it down on your hand if need be, or text that message to yourself, or, you know, whatever is pen and paper. But you just, you know, these things are fleeting, and grab them while you can. So just a disclaimer, remember our Silver Chef disclaimer about how you understand and treat the information that we share with you today. We do our best, but ultimately responsibility comes back to you. And a reminder that next month, our next webinar is a super important issue that we're going to be talking about. A couple of great experts in that area as well. Staff recruitment and retention. I would say it's actually the single biggest issue for food service operators in Australia. And I've been around the block, and we've been saying it's never been so bad for years. Well, double and triple that. Lots of new thinking needed. So I hope you'll come along to that as well. Introducing our panel today, Richard Edwards is a lawyer from Pragma Legal. Known Richard for a while, and first met him a few years ago when he was 100% in hospitality, and now kind of a broader legal practice than that, but passionate about the industry, and knows a lot of places where the bodies are buried, and the stories and the real issues we need to discuss. Paul Leach, also colleague that I've known for a few years, and I sold my three businesses. I sold through brokers. That's the business that Paul does, but he doesn't just do broking. He also has does a lot of business consulting, and runs a terrific Facebook group that a lot of you may be members of, and we'll put the link in the links for that as well. Julian Merrow, who I've known for a couple of years now, grown up in the restaurant industry, really knows all about hospitality from the inside and outside, now doing consulting work with restaurants and cafes and food service, and also knows all the ins and outs of shopping centres and that side of retail leasing. And then my colleague Sven Wicks, who works with me, our business development managers. They're the people who go looking for new business, and Sven's got a great background in hospitality here, and also something he told me, which last week I didn't know anything about, came top of the country in South Africa, Sven, in hospitality management or something. It's pretty impressive. What was it?
Yeah, it was hospitality degree through International Hotel School, but that's going back over a decade, so that's quite some time.
Yeah. You got to pretend you're old, eh?
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, all right. Well, let's get into the details now. And don't forget, we've got the questions there. The chat box open if you could start dropping the questions in there. But I'm going to ask Paul to just talk about state of the market. He's not going to read through the notes. You can read through those. But, you know, what's happening? Because we had a similar webinar to this a year ago and things were different. Things were the same. Yeah. Tell us, Paul, what's happening?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I guess at the moment the roller coaster continues with the COVID spell. You know, 2020 March, we saw pretty much every deal that we had fall over. For a period there, you know, Sydney especially was affected quite strongly in the areas that we operate in. And then the end of May 2020, things started to come back, and it got very busy. But it got very busy with people wanting to come into the market, and it got very difficult for the first time in the time that we've been operating. It became very difficult to actually get businesses to come to market because the suburban cafes, as most people will know, were absolutely booming, doing really well, and quite naturally, people were riding the crest of the wave. You know, they would have been crazy to sell at that point. They wanted to get what they could from it whilst it was running like that. And on the other side, the CBD businesses were just in a world of pain. And most of them were, you know, limited to trade if they were able to trade at all. So we saw a real drop off of new listings coming through, which kind of then, I guess that drove the demand with the people coming through. And there was a lot of new buyers coming through. So people that were previously in employment and maybe throughout throughout COVID had been made redundant. We saw actually with some of the bigger listings, a lot of pilots coming through. So pilots that were used to earning a good salary and they'd been laid off, or certainly no plans of working anytime soon. On some of the bigger listings, the bigger ticket listings, we had a lot of interest from buyers like that. So it kind of brought a whole wave of new buyers into the market, and also people that, like a lot of us throughout COVID, I think everyone's coming out a bit different. Nothing's going back to how it was. Everyone's realized that actually we can communicate in different ways. We don't need to do as much traveling as we did before, and businesses are changing. Lots of people that we're talking to now and since May have actually been people that have decided, that's it, I'm not going back to how it was. I just want to do something. This is my time. I've always thought about doing this. So there's been a big surge of new buyers come through from about May onwards that took it down to limited stock. And we kind of had a feeling that when JobKeeper finished, that there would be a surge the other way. And we just kind of thought that the balance would shift. But what's actually happened is all the stars have aligned. And at the moment, there seems to be an equal amount of buyers and sellers coming through. So that surge of buyers that we had is still there. But we're also now getting a lot more businesses come to the market, certainly than there was, even 2 or 3 months ago. So, yeah, overall, the market is very busy. There's plenty going on.
Hey, Paul, I've seen a comment recently that some businesses are getting little letters from the ATO saying that we're doing a bit of an audit to make sure that you've been properly qualifying for JobKeeper. Have you heard that as a motivator for anyone trying to sell?
No, not as a motive. No, Richard, sorry, not as a motivation for sell. But I do know there's been a bit of chatter about that in the group recently, and there has been. In fact, I got approached myself as well. I'm being audited. Believe it or not, for that, not for JobKeeper, but for the small business grant. So I actually got a phone call and then I got an email. So it's definitely a thing that's happening, but nobody's come through as a kind of as a motivation for selling. So yeah, nothing of that nature. So yeah, I'm obviously keen to field any questions that anyone's got around the process. Quite often, and I think what most people are looking at the moment is, the process of how to sell the business and most importantly, how to sell it. So I'm more than happy if, the idea with this is really we want this to be as interactive as possible. So whilst we're all here, it'll be good to get as many questions as we can. And if any of you guys see any in there that you think need fielding, just feel free.
Why don't you start us off with the process then, Paul? It's just like, maybe I've been running my cafe for a few years. I'm my knees are hurting, or I'm starting to think about it's time. You talk about exit planning. How do I get the ball rolling? Because obviously there's some confidentiality around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. So and the way that I look at this is, I'm a chef by trade back in the day, and I look at really the sale process very similar to how you operate as a chef, and that is that it's all about planning and preparation. So the more effort and the more planning you can put in at the front end, the easier the process is going to be for you as you go through. So a bit like, as I said, the way that you run your kitchen, if you get set up for service properly, you've got enough stock, you've done enough prep, you're good to go. You can have a busy service and everything will go smoothly, as opposed to those days where things don't go right, you're short-staffed, you haven't got enough stock, or something goes wrong. It just leads to chaos. So the approach that we take is all geared around that front end. So a big part of that, and I won't go into the details of it all, but a big part of that is looking through the two main drivers of value, the lease and the profit. So the lease, there's a lot of different aspects of the lease, beyond just how long it is, what the rent is, what the increases are, and so on. There's a lot of different aspects there that you need to look at and consider. And that's really the first starting point that we look at, because if there are things that need changing or you need to negotiate, that can take time. So it's a really good starting point to make sure you've got that kind of kicked off and that process going well.
Mm-hmm. So a few questions are popping up here, and sure. One, probably a few of them are going to be about rent, and landlord negotiation. So 12 months ago, there was, some tough negotiation backed up by new legal processes. But, what's the story with rents? Up or down, or more flexible, or?
I think, sorry to jump in, Paul, but I think in some circumstances rents have had to be reset, but it really depends on location. The term of the lease left on the business. So I wouldn't think that there's a blanket overlying fact that rentals have come down. And I think the retail activity has been really surprising to everybody. That there continues to be new cafes and restaurants opening in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say it's a blanket come down. I think in certain circumstances, rents have had to be realised. More city locations, obviously, CBD locations, but suburban locations and in some shopping centres, they're just as per normal.
Okay, so not as much movement down as maybe we might have predicted 12 months 100%. Ago. Yeah, we were sort of 100%. Expecting the end of the world, and it's not like that.
Yeah, I think there was definitely an element of that. But what's happened now is, like we said, with the market, the retail market and the business sales market, there's a flood of all these new people coming through. It's just natural supply and demand. So if we look back sort of 3 or 4 months, the deals that we were helping people with, we were getting really good rent per square metre. We were getting really good rent-free terms, 5, 6, even more in rent-free. That is getting much harder to negotiate that. Uh-huh. And we've actually had situations now where a client recently, we had the deal pretty much agreed, and then 2 other people came through and got into a bidding war and they ended up losing it. Whereas a few months ago, you would have been asking the landlord for whatever you wanted. It's definitely shifting at the moment.
Right. Okay. Sounds pretty important to have an advocate on your side to help with that negotiation, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question here from Raj, Paul, about what's the formula for valuation of a business? How much? What's it worth?
$1 million question. That's a good question, Raj. Yeah. So I'll try and keep this as sort of straightforward as I can. There is a bit that goes into it, but the basic formula is a multiple of the net profit that the business can demonstrate. And that there's several ways that you look at that. In relation to the actual net profit that you're demonstrating, depending on the size of the business, that may or may not include the owner. So if it's a smaller business, typically the owner's wage is going to be added back in. You'd be going through the P&L and you'd be looking at other things, other costs or expenses that are put through the P&L that if I was to buy the business from you, wouldn't go through. And from there, you're going to work out what the actual annual net profit of the business is, and then multiply that by anywhere between 1 times and 3 times typically. That's a broad range. 1 to 3 times is the average at the moment, and this is what most people want to know at the moment. The transactions that are going through, and I'm talking anything from sort of 100,000 up to 1.6, 1.8 million with the recent transactions. They're all around the 1.6 to 2 times net profit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where you sit on that scale is going to be determined by a number of things, and that's where you see people talk about this: the amount of trading days that you open, the amount of hours that you open, the input from the owner, all those kind of things. So the factors that going back to what I mentioned before that determine the value most, obviously the net profit. And the net profit as a figure gives you a bigger number to multiply, but also if your net profit as a percentage is higher than average, that can help push you up that scale as well. So that's a really good key metric to look at, measure and monitor as you're working through where the value of your business might be. You could have 2 businesses, and this has happened quite a lot, 2 businesses taking the same money. One's running at a sort of 7 or 8% margin, the other one 15 to 20%. And even though the turnover is the same, the value and the return to the purchaser is significantly different.
So do I trust the figure, the 15 to 20% figure? Is that just accept very well run business?
Yeah, well, it depends on who you're working with, who's giving you the numbers, and how thoroughly you do your due diligence. I think now in this day and age, it's much easier to do thorough diligence than it's ever been. Back in the day when, like my first shop, I think it would have been 98% cash. There was almost a groan from the staff when somebody pulled out a credit card because you had to do the manual transaction. But now, if you want to verify turnover, then let's talk about looking at the FBOS receipts. Let's look at extracts from the bank showing those FBOS receipts. Point of sale is much more accurate than it ever used to be. So it's a different world as far as that's concerned. But the margin, if you're buying, so if you're on the buying side, the due diligence is crucial that you understand what you're looking for and how to work through those numbers to make sure that you're not having the wool pulled over your eyes.
Yeah. Question from Mario here. He's been in retail for 22 years. We're thinking about buying a deli or cafe in Northern Beaches. I presume that's in Sydney. Where does he start? He knows retail. Is that put him on a good start, or what's the best way? Is it Gumtree?
Absolutely,
or is
yeah.
it a broker?
As we know, hospitality is about being hospitable, and if you've got a good retail background, the chances are you've got a good understanding of customer service and how that works. And then taking that to the deli side, obviously you want to have a good understanding of food and everything else. But if you find a good, well-established business and negotiate a good training period and a good handover, and if the business has been set for sale properly, there's going to be proper IP. Everything's going to be set up and systemized and process driven, which is going to give you the confidence, even if you're not coming into something that you've done before, providing you've got some sort of experience in how to deal with people, then go for it. I think, again, comes back to due diligence, making sure that you're not buying something that as soon as the owner leaves, is going to have no value.
Yeah. Good question from Alex here. If you're buying a cafe, you want to secure a better lease, a lease time, I presume they're a longer lease. When do you do this negotiation during the buying process? Richard, do you want to
absolutely
talk about that?
My view is you should be doing this at the time you're placing the offer. It needs to be that early, which means that before you put the offer in, yes, you're going to have to look at the lease and work out what it has in there. The reason being that, as a matter of course, the business will be sold with the lease. It'll be an assignment or a new lease of the premises, unless it is part of the terms of your contracts to say, we want an assignment or a new lease with these extra great terms. Then if you don't get those terms, then if it's a properly written contract, you can't walk away from the sale on the basis you didn't get the deal you wanted from the landlord. So it is, without exception, as soon as possible once the offer's gone in.
Right. What's your experience, Paul, with this on the ground? Are landlords generally ready to kind of turn, the 4 years left on a lease into a 10-year lease, or not?
Yeah, I guess it depends which side you were talking to. So if you're the seller then I would be, as we mentioned before, reading through that lease, refamiliarize yourself with it again, because in many cases, you know, you read it, or you get your solicitor read it through when you take the business over or you start the business, but you need to really revisit that and make sure that you understand that. And then if there's anything in there, like if it's a short term, for example, if you've only got a reasonable, you know, 2 or 3 years left, it's well within your interest to actually talk to your solicitor about renegotiating and getting even a variation of an extended term on there, because that will add significant value to the business. It's going to make it easier. And from obviously in most of what I'm doing, I'm advising people who are selling. And I will always try and keep the buyer away from a negotiation with the landlord at that point, because it's just one more thing. It's one more thing that can potentially go wrong. Quite often you find that buyers start negotiating with the landlord after everything's been agreed. The vendor's gone into the mindset of that's it, the business is sold. And then those negotiations with the landlord break down. The buyer starts asking for things that aren't reasonable. The landlord is put offside. They sort of, you know, there's a lot of drama that can happen there. So if you're in the selling seat, just be prepared.
The mentality of sorry, Richard, you go.
Oh, I'm just going to harp on about a recent situation where exactly that happened. Paperwork was all signed up saying a bland assignment of lease. Then the tenants, the prospective buyers, came through and demanded to meet with the landlord. And unfortunately for literally everyone involved, one of the particular representatives of the buyer was psychotic, to the point of restraining order type level stuff that we were talking about, and offended the landlord so much. I think the landlord was terrified to allow them to get in there. Yeah. And for some reason, we managed to get the landlord to consent. And then they came back for even more changes to it. And then the whole thing fell over. Took months. Cost everyone money. It was a waste of time.
So the old saying about when you've done the deal, shut up. Sounds like it's Julian.
There's just a real balance between when you do that and who does that. And usually you're right, Richard and Paul, that when an incoming buyer starts to go to a landlord and requesting, you know, an extension of lease and starts asking for all these different things, the landlord does get their back up a little bit. You're better off having the seller, if they're wanting a bit of an amendment to the lease and an extension to give them some more to sell, you're far better off the seller doing that, you know, before obviously you go to market, because the buyer will usually be a little bit more aggressive and can ruin a relationship very quickly.
Yeah. So another question here about regional New South Wales, but it's regional everywhere, I think. I mean, the only place we can go on our holidays is the country, discovering all sorts of places. Sorry, where's that question? It's a lot happening here. Are more people looking for regional cafes at the minute? Paul, what's the story outside the big cities?
Yes, short answer, yes, it does depend. There's certain pockets that are absolutely booming at the moment. So Port Macquarie is a standout for us at the moment. It's just been going absolutely crazy up there. We're a huge amount of demand. As soon as we listed something there, you know, under offer very quickly. Tari recently, we just sold one full asking price in 7 weeks. So it just depends. And there's other areas where you're just not getting any traction at all. It's very hard to pick it. So there's regional Queensland's been very popular because of the visa criteria there. So you know, for residency, there's been a lot of traction there. So it's generally speaking, yes, a lot more interest in regional areas than there usually is. But I think that's partly the rise in the whole market. And then certain pockets, like you mentioned, Ken, because we can't go overseas and more people are discovering towns that they didn't even know existed 2 hours away from where they live, then that obviously is pushing that demand. But, you know, places like, Sanford, not that that's regional, but Sanford, house prices there gone up 30%, huge demand there. Coffs, Harbour, you know, all those places, they do seem to be booming at the moment.
Okay, and I guess one of the management issues around that is running this business and actually attracting staff with a brutal employment market. But even any country business, my observation as a customer is it seems like the owners are much more heavily involved in making coffees and clearing tables and all those sorts of things. You've got to be ready to do that.
Yeah, I think some of it comes down to the size of the business as well, Ken. You know, I see that here, you know, even the places that I go to, the smaller venues, as we know, you know, unless you're in there in a smaller operation, it's not the way you need it to be or want it to be. So yeah, it does depend a little bit on the size of that. I've got, you know, people in, I've got, you know, clients in regional areas, consulting clients, very successful businesses that, you know, aren't as involved, but it just depends on, you know, what kind of management you can afford to attract, I guess. Sure.
A few questions here wanting to talk to our panelists directly. Absolutely welcome to do that. But what I'd suggest is with the email I'm going to be sending everyone shortly after the webinar, we'll have everyone's contact details. So that's probably the best way to do that. Another question here about good questions, everyone coming in, and our panelists are piling in with answers as well. Yeah, good question there about from Ali about is it possible to lock out a tenant since COVID laws finished in March?
Yes, you can. Had it happen to a client. They were $40,000 in arrears, and the ability to access protections under various bits of COVID response legislation was limited to situations where there was a genuine dispute under the COVID response situation legislation. If you are behind in rent, you're just behind in rent. You're not a protected species anymore.
Yeah, anymore. Okay.
And there's also other avenues of obviously failure to trade. So there's other avenues within a lease that can be can be utilised obviously to block out a tenant.
Yeah.
Okay. So question here from Karen to panelists, probably one for you, Julian, about a food court. The centre's been sold to new investors taking over. We're going to be relocated to another shop, refurbishment of the whole centre, yada, yada. What's your take? What's the best approach here for Karen?
Well, so within that lease, there should be a relocation clause. And that relocation clause does allow a landlord to relocate that tenant to a similar site or location that obviously won't be a lesser site, you know, by trade level. So they're also protected by the Retail Tenancy Act, so they need to make sure they look at that. But it really becomes down to a negotiation of how much the landlord is going to pay, what that rent-free period would look like to move them, because there'll be downtime more than likely. So that sort of does become a bit of a negotiation on that relocation. But certainly the landlord would need to pay for that.
Yeah, and absolutely get your lawyer to have a look through the way that clause actually works. In some states and territories, the relocation clauses are regulated, which means you might have some additional rights that are not provided for under the lease. And I've heard a lot of people having troubles when it does come to relocation. So be alert, be aware, try not to be alarmed.
Okay.
As Richard said just quickly, it's really specialised, so you do want to get legal advice on it. It is very specialised.
I think, Paul, you've covered a bit of this question here from Leo about, you know, how do I make sure that the figures are legitimate, that you've got real numbers, and obviously the rise of tap and go and the disappearance of cash helps us all with that. Any other tips you've got for?
With due diligence, there's plenty of things you can do. You can get the BAS statements. You can get, as we said, bank statements with the extracts showing the FPOS. You can ask for suppliers, invoices and receipts, and make sure that everything's being paid. Obviously, you're going to get record of all the pay through the BAS statements and tax returns. So it's it's just a process of working through the numbers almost forensically. And bearing in mind that usually, you know, this is one of the biggest expenses that you're likely to outlay. So it really is important that you're very careful about where your money goes and that you're buying the right thing.
And there's another person, you know, in the formula who can be very useful, and that's a bookkeeper or accountant. Great to have Christine Green. I think she's on the webinar today, knows the restaurant and cafe industry inside out, and very good for all of that.
Yeah, it does make a huge difference. And I know there's been a couple of instances where we've kind of gone through the P&L for a client, looking at it, and you see the bookkeeping fees and you think, oh, there was one instance recently where the guy was paying a significant amount in bookkeeping. But when we got to due diligence and when we got further down the deal, this guy, you know, he went from me thinking you could probably get that for a couple of $100 a week less, to me thinking this guy is worth his weight in gold. You know, he was instrumental in helping get that deal, you know, keeping the momentum in the deal, which is crucial, and ultimately helping to get the deal across the line. So you very much get what you pay for with that sort of thing.
Paul, there's a question from earlier on from Danielle about, we found it difficult to sell in June 2019, pre-COVID, and was offered to the Chinese market, but that certainly was, you know, like new arrivals, people coming on business visas, I presume that's referring to. No takers, we were turning over large amount of money, 2 million. How do you know who do we utilise to assist in a sale like this? Sounds like a pretty substantial kind of business. So I guess that brings up the point to me is like, why use a broker? Because obviously there's commission, but there's a lot of legwork that brokers will do. Could you, put your best phrase forward?
In answer to Danielle's question, there's a number of factors that it could be there. I mean, usually, even in a normalized market, if you're putting a business on the market and you're not getting good traction within the first sort of 4, 6, 8 weeks, which is a crucial time, then that's the market talking to you. And it's really up to you whether or not you listen to it. And silence, you know, from the market is basically telling you one of several things. And usually that comes down to the price. So if buyers don't feel that the price is right, you're not going to get any traction or any movement. So regardless of what you think the value is, it's only going to get really decent inquiries from qualified buyers if it's positioned correctly. And there's a fine line, there's a very fine line there. And that balance between what you need, what you expect, what you want, and what the market will pay is something that you've got to spend a bit of time on. So a proper appraisal and understanding the true value and then marketing it at the right price is a big factor, and that will deter a lot of buyers. The market now, compared to how it was a few years ago, the market's so savvy. It's so easy to get information. I mean, you know that you go online, you go into the Facebook groups, any of the hospitality groups out there, and you want to ask a question about, you know, I'm looking at this cafe, it's doing this much, and this is the profit, and you can get feedback and information much easier than you ever have been able to. So you can't fool the market. You have to really put it forward. And with the marketing as well, you see this sometimes. If Danielle's not getting enough inquiries, is it going in front of the right people, and is it being positioned in the right way? So if you put too much information in the advert, but people have got no reason to contact you. If you don't put enough in, they're just going to keep scrolling and looking through. And at most times,
that's interesting. I mean, simplifying the business without taking away the character of it. I remember selling my first cafe. It was, I won't say it was a complicated business, but it was very kind of 7 days and nights, and I paid all my payroll directly into people's bank account, which was back in the 90s. That was unknown. And that scared away a really good buyer because she was just used to paying everyone cash. So, yeah, I'd sort of overcomplicated. I was about to change it, but yeah, simplify. Some great questions everyone's dropping in, and our experts are really doing a great job answering them as well. So I know some of those, we'll just handle them that way. Christine Green's put her details. Christine, why don't you drop your website in there as well? That would be great. Good question from Maria here about opening a pop-up restaurant during the Heim season. Any feedback about pop-ups? Is it just like PR hype, or is it?
No, I've seen it work. Certainly, there's been, you know, you've got great locations of cafes that aren't trading 7 days a week, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and there's an opportunity to come in and do maybe a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night trade of a slow roast or a different concept. And I think that's happening a little bit more. And I think there is definitely opportunities to do that and to test the market on your concept before you go into a permanent lease. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities. There's a few websites now that will also have dark kitchens and shared cafe opportunities as well. So, yeah, I might drop one of them in the chat as well, but yeah, I've seen it work, certainly.
Yeah, it's a really exciting concept for a lot of places because it's new news. You've got something to talk about beyond it's a new menu. You've actually got a whole new opportunity in there. You'll need to, if you're looking to use somebody else's existing restaurant and infrastructure, you'll need to cut a deal with them, unsurprisingly, to work out who's paying for everything, who's responsible for things, particularly stock and staff, because that's going to change your obligations in there and things like insurance and bits and pieces like that. I'm also very apprehensive of what's going to happen from a liquor licensing perspective. You'll need to have a detailed think about how that's going to fit in amongst this, because if you're the one, there's not an existing license there, I don't know how you're going to get it because you don't occupy the premises. There is an existing license there. You can't be seen to be the one who is serving liquor because you're not licensed to do so. All manageable. It just takes a conversation to work out precisely how you're going to do it. Peter Gunn from IDES in Melbourne was doing that for a year or so, just on the 1st of March before he got his bricks and mortar in Collingwood. So that's a 1, 2, 3 hat restaurant. Peter's amazing. So yeah, it's absolutely available.
World of pain around liquor licensing at times. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So Richard, I put a few more points up. You've been answering lots of great questions. Really appreciate how busy you've been on the chat as well. But there's a few issues you wanted to particularly raise that I've got on the screen there. Do you want to talk to those?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I had to be typing away because, you know, as a lawyer, I can't help but say something with Paul speaking a word in edgewise. Couple of bits and pieces in there. Lawyers are really useful. We're bastards, but we're actually kind of handy to have around. We've been there, we've done it, and our job is to get you over the line as much as we can. We're there to look after you. Our job is, particularly as a commercial lawyer, is to make it so if something's going to go wrong, we've already put the structures in place to stop it going wrong, or at least to control it as much as we can. Some of the early things you can do, I've got the point about heads of agreements being binding or pointless. I've often seen non-binding heads of agreement, which means that people sign a piece of paper which is not worth anything, and then go to the bank who goes, well, we don't actually know what you're going to pay for it because it's not binding, and getting into bed with the landlord, and the landlord gets jack of them, and then the whole thing falls apart and the seller's left with nothing. You need to have an offer which has all the touch points in the agreement, which are going to go into the contract all together. What's happening with the lease? New lease, variation, plain assignment, what's happening there? What's happening with employees? Who's footing the bill for making the buggers redundant or paying out their long service leave, annual leave entitlements? I would bet your bottom dollar that Sven's going to pop up and talk about the equipment finance side of things. Certainly the old school way is the seller has to cut a check and the PPSR releases happen at the end. What's happening with your licenses? What about the car park, the little pop-up store that you've got with the chairs and tables in the car park? What's happening with that? Condition of equipment is one where I've had so many arguments with the other side when it hasn't been documented properly. Nothing like having to argue about who has to replace the seals on the fridge. It's yeah, do it now. Do it when you know what you're going to get. And if you don't have enough information, get the information, then put the offer in. It's absolutely critical in there because your offer is supposed to be your offer, not things.
The start of the discussion.
Yeah, have the discussion now. Sign up when you've actually got a deal capable of being had. Very important there.
Any more questions for Richard? You've been throwing lots of good stuff to him, which I think, and everyone, you know, keep an eye on the chat. There's some great information being dropped in there, answering other people's questions. Curious, Richard, about those last two there, business names and social media. What's the story there?
So as cafes and restaurants that are a matter of course are sold as a going concern. That means it's a turnkey operation where the owner walks out and the buyer walks in. It's also a different legal entity. And also, more fundamentally, where's the website? Where's the password? How do you transfer all of these things? People forget their passwords. People forget how to log on to the damn things. So if you want to be prepared as a seller, look around now and go track down the Facebook passwords and logins. Actually, not Facebook, because you have to.
The young guy who set up the Facebook page who left ages ago.
And here's the problem with Facebook is you can't hand over username and password. You need to make them an administrator, then get them to remove you as an administrator. I've had to do that at 9 o'clock at night for a very, very tense transfer. You need to look at the list of usernames and passwords because they are the things that get handed over at settlement. The same thing happens with the business name. The ATO pretty much says you need to transfer the business name at settlement. You transfer the business name by having someone log on to this thing called Asset Connect. I've had to log on to my own Asset Connect before a year and a half after signing it up, and buggered if I could remember my password.
Yeah.
It can take 4 weeks to get a new username and password, to be able to access your business name, to get the secure transfer number to transfer it out. Get your accountant or whoever it is, get them to log in and make sure that they can see the transfer business name button. Because if they can't do that, and 2 days before you go, oh, you're going to be in all sorts of trouble. Do it now. And for that matter, with social media, if you haven't claimed your Google My Business page now, go and do it. Whether you're selling or not, you need to take control of your digital assets, which are floating around out there.
Question from Delhi, which is kind of related to all of this, is there a checklist for all this? Well, Delhi, Sven, maybe if you could just drop the link again to the Facebook group that we all kind of get so much kind of value from. And Paul's got some good checklists in there and guides to the whole buying and selling process for sure.
Christine, your comment about getting your access to your software subscriptions like Xero. I had one client who was held to ransom for a couple of days when they were changing bookkeeper, and the old bookkeeper didn't like that much and demanded to be paid through the nose. It took some very tense letters sent to them to get them to back down.
Okay. Question there from Christine, actually, about do people use this due diligence process to start grinding the price down or negotiating down? You know, like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was so expensive, or that was so small.
Yep, of course they do. Of course they do. And it might be genuine, it might not be. And a properly drafted contract and heads of agreement, which says it's subject to a takings period. If the takings are going down or they're a little bit suspicious, then under the contract, you have the right to say the takings aren't what I thought they were going to be. Either I'm terminating, or you can come to the table for a renegotiation of the purchase price.
Okay. Let's hear from Julian, who's a bit of a king when it comes to negotiation, as well as knowing shopping centres inside out and the restaurant business. But you've got a few points here as well. I'm really interested in that first one. You say the first offer has more influence than any others. What are your ninja tricks for negotiation, Julian?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I come from a retail background. My family had restaurants, and I had restaurants personally as well. And you know, at a later stage in my career, I went to the dark side on the landlord side and worked heavily in shopping centres. So I understand shopping centres back to front and lease negotiations. And I think the first point there is preparation and planning are really two of the most important components to any negotiation. I think negotiating without preparing or planning what you desire, what you need, the information you have, the money that you can spend, the rent that you can pay. I think without understanding that, you end up negotiating with brute force and not really understanding the process. So once you've done your preparation and your planning and you understand the marketplace in terms of, even if you are buying or selling a cafe, is doing your homework and understanding the market, then when you do go to either renegotiate a lease or buy a cafe, you're going to have a basic understanding of what does that first offer represent? How do I make a first offer? There's a lot of conjecture in negotiations as to whether I should make the first offer or not. There's no problem in making the first offer, but it does have an influence on the overall outcome of the purchase, or in a lease negotiation of the end lease that you pay. Making a ridiculous offer, and I'm sure Richard and Paul and the guys have been through this, is making a ridiculous offer just doesn't work. You basically, you can lose the sale or lose the purchase. You
just insult people, don't you? And they get offended.
You do. And you look at it and say, oh, that's not even real. I'm not even going to give that any time. So you just walk away from that deal completely. So I think, understanding where that offer needs to be. Now, on the flip side of that, Ken, is being too generous with your first offer can also obviously influence that you'll overpay for a property, or from a lease perspective, you'll overpay the lease. So doing your homework and planning will give you a bit of an understanding of where that offer needs to be, that first offer. Really, really important. In regards to landlords, I know that there's been a fair few questions coming up in regards to leases and landlords and the likes. The fact of the matter is if you're buying or selling a business, you generally need the landlord. So I think the sooner you understand the landlord process and who the landlord is, the better. And shopping centres and strip locations do have a different way of dealing with a landlord. If you're dealing with a Westfield versus somebody that owns a building in self-managed super. So I think you need to understand that before you go into buying a business and or selling your business and seeing where your lease actually is up to. It's not something that you can hide from. You need the sooner you address that, the better, I think, dealing with the landlord. And again, it goes back to preparation and planning. You know, when you are dealing with a landlord, you know, you can't go and ask for a lease extension with ridiculous numbers. It just doesn't work.
So for those people who've got shopping centre tenancies, maybe coming in or wanting to exit, is there any extra things they need to consider? Because there's shopping centre management and the whole, feels like there's another layer of kind of supervision there.
Yeah, definitely. And we were having a discussion previously about permitted use and things like that. It's the little nuances within a shopping centre that you need to understand that's within the lease, because a certain permitted use in a lease can stop you from selling a cake or deciding that I'm going to do fresh juice because nobody's doing juice, but it's not in your permitted use and you're not allowed to do that. You will need to ask for the landlord's approval to be able to actually do that. And then the assignment of the lease, and I think Richard might have touched on this as well, the assignment of the lease is a really big part of selling your business in the shopping centre or buying a business in the shopping centre, having that lease assigned, which means the landlord will want to see a bit of a business plan and a P&L or some asset and liability statements to make sure that you are from the industry and you know what you're doing and that you can afford to pay the lease. You know, I'm sure there's many a business that the deal's fallen over because the assignment hasn't gone through. And I've certainly
so interested to hear comments from you, Julian, and others about selling. You know, we've got a buyer, but they're new to the industry. I mean, even someone's mentioned they've been in retail, but presume no hospitality experience. How do we brush these people up so the landlord's satisfied? What's the?
I think a business plan will do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as simple as actually completing a business plan and showing the landlord that, okay, I don't have experience in the industry, but I have a plan. And I think that one document alone, putting it in front of a landlord and saying, here's my business plan on what I want to do with the business I'm purchasing, that's a massive tick straight there. So it's really a simple process and everyone should do it anyway. Not just for the landlord. I think everyone should be writing their business plans and a bit of a plan of what they.
Great idea, Julian. Never happens, unfortunately. Paul, what's your thoughts on making the innocent, inexperienced buyer looking like a fabulous prospect?
Yeah, there's a number of things you can do, and you know, as Julian said, a business plan is a very good and important part of that. It's about putting forward to the landlord that you're actually going into it with some thought. You're not just buying it on a whim. The other thing that comes from the planning and preparation side, the more work you've done in the background to systemize and make your business process driven, then the easier it is for you to back out. The less reliant the business is on you, then the easier it is to convince a landlord. So if we've got a business, for example, that's under full management and you've got a buyer that's qualified financially, if the current owner is not working there or doing limited amount of work there, it's a much stronger argument. You can basically push back to the landlord. And we've done this several times where landlords have the right to push back, but quite often if you challenge it, you can.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Yeah, because people are wanting to buy freedom, aren't they? You know, they're buying a business, but they actually don't want to be bringing the bins in the morning and taking them out at the end of the night.
It's not really part of the dream, is it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just that last question there, Julian. You've probably seen a few people who come in and want to change everything because they think and you know, maybe what was there before was pretty crappy. but how quickly should I change things?
Yeah, I think it's always a valid point, and I think we all would have seen over the journey that people come in and buy a business that maybe was very successful, and within a short period of time, it's closed. So I think when you're buying a business, you're buying that business for a reason, and there may be circumstances where there's an opportunity to tinker with some things and change some things to increase the revenue and profit, but changing things drastically quickly is not preferred. I think that you need a little bit of time to understand the market, understand the clientele, get in there, and be with your staff in your business before you start making substantial changes, because again, you're buying that goodwill for a reason and that business for a reason, and completely changing a menu overnight can be fraught with danger. So it's just doing it slowly, really, really slowly. And I've taken over businesses before, and just slowly over a 3-4 month period, introduce some new items, do some specials, see how they work. So I think just taking it, slowly when you're buying a business is really, really important, because I think we've all seen businesses close really quickly from that.
Okay, so one of the issues is transferring the assets, and there's going to be evaluation of the equipment and all those kind of things, and we might come back to that in a minute too. But some of it may be Silver Chef rentals or a Silver Chef agreement, and I know we're keen to transfer that over. Sven, do you want to just talk to us about how we would try and make that as easy as possible?
Absolutely can, and I think that's probably the key word, is that with Silver Chef we do make it easy. It's definitely one of the most common questions that we do get asked is selling the business, what happens with the contracts on the existing equipment or assets, if you like. And so essentially there are two options. You can pay out and essentially fulfill or terminate the existing contracts on the equipment, and that then becomes part of the purchase. Or secondly, we can assign the existing rental agreements to the incoming owner or new owner, if you like. So having said that, if the contract is still in place and sub 12 months, they can then, with the permission of both parties, have those contracts transferred into the new owner's name, and then they'll be taking over the remainder of the contract at the same weekly repayment. Or if the contract's expired and it's past that 12-month period, they can then start on those same assets a brand new contract, 12-month agreement with weekly payments based on the depreciated value of the asset. So something that may have been with the current owner at $2,500, the new owner would then take that over at, say, $1,200 written down value, and then continue to pay the weekly repayments based on the $1,200.
Sounds like, it's important to have some kind of legal and accounting assistance to help make that nice and smooth, but I know we're certainly ready to facilitate that. Thanks, Sven. We've got Sven's details are there, and he'll drop them into the chat as well. Any other comments, Paul or Richard, about the valuation of equipment and the condition of equipment that's being sold? Because the contract price is a combination of equipment and goodwill, isn't it? And sometimes one goes up and one goes down. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, just on the what Sven was talking about there in relation to people asking whether they should pay out or sign over. Typically, the way that we're looking at the valuation, as I mentioned, is based on the profit that business is generating. So if you look at it from the buyer's perspective, if we're asking them to then take on a contract for rental equipment, we're basically saying, on the one hand, this business is making this much money, but by the way, that oven that helps to generate that money, you've got to pay extra for, or you've got to take on. And it's another thing that complicates or potentially can complicate the deal. So my preference is always to vendor pays out. And even if that means you pushing the price a bit to make sure you've got that covered. But that whole planning process, you're going to understand what the liabilities are. And Silver Chef or lease equipment would be one of those liabilities.
Interesting.
There's also the tax implications of it. I always forget which way around this is. To be honest, I think Christine's going to tell me. That I think you want the goodwill to be as low.
The incoming, so the buyer wants the asset value to be higher.
So they can depreciate it.
So they can depreciate it, but that's only it doesn't actually have any bearing on the actual value.
No, just at least the apportionment of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, from my side, it's working out what condition you're actually taking the assets in. Is it in good working order, or is it as inspected, or quite what it's going to be? And when it comes to inspecting just before settlement, you're going in to make sure that the assets are actually in that condition. Having the compressor on the fridge crap out 2 days after, so you notice that it's crapped out 2 days before settlement, is expensive and frustrating. It's hopefully going to stop the situation which a client has faced, where it looked fine at settlement and 2 days later it all died.
Yeah, it's useful if you're buying. I was just sorry, Ken, just going to say, if you're buying, it's useful to also have a list of exclusions, because quite often there's people that have things that they're taking when they finish up that are, you know, personal items or sentimental items, or sometimes just things that they want at home. So as Richard said there, check the inventory and actually check it on the handover as well, just to make sure.
Yeah, I had a client who demanded that the I think it was the TM3 Thermomix was coming home with them. Thanks very much. They were absolutely not selling that.
Pretty common, that one, yeah.
Yeah, well, you'll be pleased to know that Silver Chef doesn't finance. We don't fund Thermomixes. Okay, so we're just wrapping up now, and the majority of people from the question you asked when you registered are in the business of selling a business. So just wouldn't mind just a quick tip from each of our experts about, you know, something that maybe gets overlooked, or if people did earlier on in the process would save a bit of grief and get the price up. Sven, why don't you go first? Do you want to do that, or?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Look, I guess for me, it's, you know, the guys that we have on board, and guys, thank you, you've done a great job. Just being thorough, and something that Richard touched on before is making sure, regardless of the contracts, whether it's been paid out or whether they are being transferred, that you get a third-party technician in to inspect and make sure what you're getting is what you're paying for, and what you're getting is what's actually being transferred to you in terms of contract.
Yeah.
You just don't want to be caught out, as Richard said, 2 days in, you know, you get in and your refrigerator is sitting at 24 degrees. Not great.
Paul, what about you?
I guess for people selling, then it comes back to just making sure that you get the price right. So don't list for what you want, list for what it's worth. And if it's not worth what you want, then do some work to increase the value and then list it. There's no point testing the market, no point going overpriced or of course underpriced, where you could be coming out with 20, 30,000 less than you should be. And for people buying, then read the lease. The lease is one of the most important documents, and you can have a business with fantastic financials. If it's got a terrible lease, there's no value. So get to understand what to look for in a lease, or use a professional that looks at them all the time, and make sure that you really know what you're signing for, because that lease is very binding. So make sure, it's a false economy trying to save, money on a good solicitor when it comes to reviewing a lease, because if you get a bad lease and you get stuck on it, you've got real problems.
Richard, what about your quick tip for people who are selling a business?
For selling, it's the old prior preparation rule. Understand your plant and equipment, understand your stock, understand what's happening with your employees, and most importantly, understand the lease. The lease is the single most important piece of paper behind your business, without exception. The only reason you won't have one of them is because somehow you own the land. And if you do, I wish you all the best. That sounds fantastic. For buyers, my biggest advice is don't fall in love with the location. This is a business. There are numbers behind it. Have a business plan, not a beloved thing you're gonna, fall in love with.
Good. And Julian, what's your?
I think I'll just close out with reiterating the other thing. The lease and the landlords are the most important aspect of it. And I think as a seller, the communication with your landlord and understanding your lease is absolutely paramount. And as a buyer, coming into a lease and understanding what lease you're purchasing and the landlord that you're going to be in a relationship with for a very long time is absolutely important, and must be completed straight up front.
Terrific. Well, let's thank our our guests, our guest experts today. Just my quick reminder about our next webinar coming up in 10th of June, but we'll be sending an email about that. But thanks to Paul and Sven and Richard and Julian. And yeah, it's been an awesome, I mean, look at that chat session. There's absolute gold there. And when you get your replay of the webinar, that chat will be actually included down the side of it. So you can review that as well as some terrific information there as well. Yeah, so thanks everyone. We'll see you on the next one. And absolutely share this when you get the link to the recording, share it to everyone else. Lots of nice comments coming in. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for bringing the whole thing alive with the interaction on the chat. Really appreciate that very much. Okay, so I might just turn the screen sharing off and
stop the recording.
Stop the recording.
And
You all remember last time.
We've all been I can still see a red light up there, Ken.
No, this is our last little bit where we just have a little friendly goodbye. That was awesome, guys. Really appreciate it very much. Fantastic.
Let's jump into watching some TikToks, Ken.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You'll find me on TikTok if you search for my name. See you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.
See you.
Yeah.